I love that you brought up Egypt because when I was there recently for the first time, the creations are just so big and grand and symmetrical and perfect that a lot of people go there and they try to figure out how it was made or why they did it. But going there for the first time, I couldn't even worry about any of those questions. I just had to have that feeling of awe. And it makes you feel like possibilities are endless. It's very inspiring. Whereas when you look at the opposite of that, I would say like a modern city where everything is very like cheaply built. Everything is kind of temporary. It's built, as quickly and as efficiently as possible with the cheapest materials available. And it makes you feel kind of like temporary and cheap and like you're meaningless.
This is Spirit Gym. In today's episode, our host Paul Chek is excited to talk with Mark Wooding, the artist behind After School, an Emmy-winning YouTube channel with over 3 million subscribers. Mark's mission is to enhance profound ideas with art. This podcast would not be possible without you, our listeners, and also our premier sponsors, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, Wild Pastures, and Organifi. Keep listening to this episode for special offers and discounts from our sponsors, or visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast. The topic of today's conversation with Paul and Mark is the art spirit.
Well, hello, everybody. Today, we are going to have a chat with Mark Wooding. He is the illustrator for After School. I'm sure most of you have seen the amazing After School videos they share and all the badass illustrations. Well, today you get to hear from the guy that does them. And he's got a very cool podcast. Mark, I loved your podcast with Alex and Allison Gray. I thought that was phenomenal. And so welcome to Spirit Gym, buddy.
Thank you, Paul. It is an honor to be here. I've heard a lot of great things about you, and I'm excited to pull the thread and learn more.
Yeah, well, let's dance, shall we? I just thought it would be great to get a bit of a background on you and kind of an overview of your life, your education, and how you developed your amazing skills as an artist. And when you guys do the after school videos, it looks like you're doing this art at the speed of lightning. How long does it take you to do these? Because some of these drawings you're doing are pretty damn complicated.
Oh, wow. So it's definitely a labor of love. Each video takes about 2 weeks to create. So I only put out a video once every 2 weeks. That's about as fast as I can do them. And I've been doing After School for 8 years now. So I guess I'm like an OG of YouTube now.
Are you the founder of it?
Yep, I'm the founder, the artist. I curate all the content. I used to write all the scripts, but it's just me and my assistant now.
What brought you into doing that? I mean, that is a badass idea you came up with there, and I got to give it to you. You really do select great content. So where did the inspiration for that come from? And the name is such a good one too.
Yeah, I'll do my best to answer it. I've never been a great student in school, but I've always been really curious and I've loved learning. Just never was the best at getting the A's and the SAT scores, but
you're not alone, baby.
Yeah. But the one thing I was really good at was show and tell. And every week, yeah, I would blow show and tell out of the water. I would prepare all week for show and tell in like elementary school. And I guess this is just like a grander version of show and tell.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
It's show and tell for big people.
Right. And I don't have like a grand curriculum that I'm like deploying on people. Like I'm right there with the viewer learning this subject as I'm creating it. So for me, this is the best way to learn is for me to illustrate it because then I don't forget it.
Yes, that's exactly how I do it too. Someday I got to get you over here, man. I got hundreds and hundreds of notebooks and I illustrate everything as I study so that I can do exactly what you're doing, embody it and put it into concepts that mean something to me. And, one of the things I bet you have this same thing. I freaking hate books that are nothing but text. It's like, how are you supposed to like understand a deep concept that you're studying quantum physics or something? There's not a single diagram. So I say, okay, I'm going to fix this. And as I'm taking my notes, I make all the diagrams that they should have made.
Absolutely. I definitely have to get over to your spot, but I'm afraid to go there because I know I might not leave.
Well, many people have wanted to camp out in my library, and some have slept in there for days on end. You're giving us a little taste. You're like me. You didn't like school by the sound of it. I remember the first time I found an after school video, I'm like, this is freaking badass. This is the way it should be. This not only is that this is good content, but it's well illustrated. It's easy to follow, and the messages are really good. So, I mean, I got to say hats off for that, man, because you're really helping a lot of people, and you get a lot of views on these things too.
Yeah, I basically just try to combine all the learning formats into one, because some people need to read the thing, some people need to do it, some see it, some hear it. And so with after school, I'm trying to combine everything to the point where you almost feel like you're the artist drawing the thing because the creation's unfolding right in front of you. But
That's
just
great.
to give the little backstory, I've been drawing since before I could walk. My dad would throw a pen on a paper and I would like squirm over and start doing scribbles. And, I didn't know if I was good at art or not, but then I won this massive art contest when I was 4 or 5 years old. And they gave me this
Cool.
trophy that was like taller than me. And, I think it's when you're a little kid and you get some confirmation like that, it kind of sends you on a path like, oh, wow, I'm an artist now.
Yeah. Thank God.
Yeah. And then, I tried to lend my skills to the commercial realm. I did freelance work for tons of companies, like all your favorites, like Johnson & Johnson and LinkedIn and Facebook, and pretty big clients. And the money was good, but, I just felt empty inside. And there came a breaking point where some things went south in business, and I really had compromised my values to do that job. And my mantra at the time was just get the thing done. And when that's your mantra as an artist, you're really not being creative anymore. And it's like a chore.
Mm-hmm.
And so I threw all that away and I said, put that on pause. You can always go back to freelancing if you want. This was 8 years ago. And I said, give yourself a year to just create for the sake of creating. Treat it like a hobby again. Get back to the joy of creativity. You had to say no to a lot of money. You have no subscribers. You get no views. For the first 6 months, it's like, why am I even doing this? You're spending 100 hours on a video and then you're putting it out there and nobody watches it. It's pretty discouraging. But, I stuck to that promise to myself to just do it for a year. And the goal was to hit 100,000 subscribers by a year. And all of a sudden, one video took off and then another video took off, and it was like a skyrocket. And literally on the year, it hit 100K.
Well, there you go. You can manifest.
True.
You're proving exactly what I teach in Spirit Gym right now.
Time to take it to the next level.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And it's like anything. It takes a little while. I'm sure you've been fishing before, and some days they bite real quick and some days you're out there for hours and it's the same, you're fishing for the same stuff. You're using the same lure and the same bait you did last time and it worked like magic. And then some days it's just like, what's going on? These fish are asleep today, but then you get the bite and off it goes from there. And I think once you get one good video out there, then people go, well, geez, I wonder what else he has. And then they find out all the ones that you had that they didn't even know were there. And then it, kind of catapults itself from there. But how many videos have you produced now? It must be in the hundreds.
Just on After School, over 200. Yeah, I've taken a couple down. But then I have the other channel, and then I have all those freelance videos. And there's quite a few videos that aren't on After School.
What's the other channel?
Before School.
Oh, and that's more recent, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I haven't really had a chance to look at that, but I've always looked for and appreciated the after school videos. I didn't realize that it was you. I just thought you were the illustrator, but every single one of them, I'm always excited to see it. And a lot of these things I've studied very, very deeply. So one of the things I appreciate is that the videos are actually accurate. I've never seen a single one of them where I said, well, they got that wrong, or like, holy shit, somebody really got their shit together here. And you get great people like Randall Carlson.
Mm-hmm.
All the people you get on there are really top-notch people. They're the people, to me, that we need more voice from, because, in tribal societies, while the parents were out hunting and gathering, it was the elders that were educating the children and teaching them arts and crafts and songs and dances and how to enact the myths out. We lost our elders over time. And as we become this sort of automated, industrialized, mechanized, almost robotic, mindless society, now all the elders are, just buying bigger televisions and cruise ships, and it seems like they're not really getting involved in the lives of the children. And after school is really in many ways giving us the kind of wisdom that the elders would have given us. So I think that you're providing a very important service for the world right now.
Wow, I really appreciate that. And I have been giving that quite a bit of thought because it feels like things are changing faster and faster and faster. And this isn't just a perception. It's if you look at how old people are treated in our society now, they're kind of viewed as maybe a bit of a burden.
Yeah, like dead wood.
But in 100 years ago, an elder's wisdom was critical. They would tell you when the herds are going to move in or what the weather patterns are because all their experience is so valuable. But now a lot of the older generation, their knowledge is not really that useful to a 20-year-old, even though it is in many ways, but the 20-year-old might not think it is.
I think part of it has to do with the breakdown of the family structure. And then I think also social media has infected them with this attraction to all these fake gurus and people that are really have no depth or lack honesty and real presence. When I was a kid, my parents had a 142-acre farm. Half of it was wooded forest. So the analogy is if you get lost on your 142-acre farm, the worst thing that'll happen is you'll run into the fence and go, oh, I'm at the edge of the property. At least I know what direction not to go. So if you think of a kid who's got no fence around the mental real estate, they get so far. In the first generation, mom and dad could say, hey, you're getting lost in all this bullshit. Come on back. For the next generation, there's no fence. They get further out. And I think it's got to the point now where the parents of the kids today were the generation of kids that got lost 2 generations ago. So now everybody's all lost together.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Yeah. It's hard to spot a fake guru. And I'm curious to know, do you have any recommendation on how to sift through the nonsense?
Well, I think the most important question anybody can ask, no matter who they're watching, including myself, meaning even if you're watching me, is a very important question. And I'll give you the background for the question. Steiner describes the development of the soul in stages. It's kind of like a plant goes from seed progressively to flowering and fruiting, right? First, you have the mineral soul. Then you have the biological soul, which becomes, for us, the sentient soul, like an animal is sentient, so our biological body. Then you have what Steiner described as the intellectual soul, which is what gives people so much trouble. But Steiner says the next stage of development, which is very critical, is the development of what he calls the awareness soul. And he says the awareness soul begins to develop when you begin asking this one question: is it really true? So if you don't begin asking the question, is it really true, you never really actually make inroad into becoming who you are as an individual being, because the ego is created out of everybody else's ideas until you start asking, is it really true? And then using discernment to erase or disconnect from concepts that you once thought were true, but you find out now are not true. For example, many people think if you're gaining weight, you got to cut calories, or that you need to do a diet. But so far, cutting calories has never worked and doing diets has never worked, and we're the fattest, sickest people we've ever been. So you have to say, well, I've done 2 or 3 diets now. Is it really true that counting calories is the way to go? So you start doing research. You might run across a book called How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy by some bald guy, and he'll explain exactly why that never works. You have to ask, is it really true? So here's a perfect example. I once listened to Sadhguru on Aubrey Marcus's podcast, and he said something in there that I was like mind blown for how famous of a guru he is. He said, God has personally come to visit India 9 times. And I said, okay, well, that's really interesting. This guy is supposed to be a very famous, highly evolved guru. And he is saying that God personally came to India 9 times. Okay, well, how do you get that for which there is no other, the source of everything, to show up in this anthropomorphic form to come to India, but not somewhere else, to India 9 times in a row, when if God is God, then God not only is India, God's the entire cosmos and everything in it. So if you ask yourself when you heard that, is it really true that God could show up in India 9 times when God is everything and everyone? Then automatically you say, okay, now I know I've got to be really more careful about believing what this guy says. So when you know, I'm forever doing Paul Reacts videos. I just did one, some guy says stretching never works. It's a bunch of bullshit. So you have to ask yourself, is that really true? I mean, we've been stretching for a long time, and every world-class athlete knows how important stretching is. I had another one where a guy was saying, aspartame is not bad for you. Anyone that thinks it is full of shit. I'm like, okay, good. There's a good question everybody should ask. Is it really true? So I got out a whole pile of research on aspartame and showed that that's absolutely ridiculous. And anybody that falls for that crap is going to make themselves sick and their kids sick. So you see the importance of what I'm saying without going further. No matter who said something, if you don't know from personal life experience whether that's true or not, then you have to ask, is it really true? And this brings me to a very important point. David Bohm said, you know who David Bohm is?
No.
David Bohm's one of the pioneering quantum physicists who's probably the most spiritual of all quantum physicists. He spent 20 years studying with Krishnamurti. He was friends and associates with Einstein. He developed a very, very amazing theory of quantum physics. To this day is highly, highly regarded. I've used it throughout Spirit Gym because it's mind-blowingly good. So David Bohm, Oppenheimer was his professor. There's a great documentary on David Bohm's life on Amazon. If you just search David Bohm on Amazon, he'll blow your mind. But anyhow, David Bohm said, real thinking is hard work. That's why most people just rearrange their prejudices and call it thinking. There's the problem. We have people worldwide that inherently are too lazy to do the work of real thinking. So if you ask the question, is it really true? Now you've got to do the work to go investigate it for yourself. And most of the things that people are listening to are too deep for them to really understand. So not only do you have to go investigate it, but you've got to find people that have enough knowledge to help you discern whether or not what you're reading is really true. Therefore, you are now on the hero's journey. You are really doing the work to become an authentic individual with your own mind. And so that's why the development of the awareness soul is so important, because until you ask, is it really true, and do the work, you remain in the child archetype, which makes you highly susceptible to pseudo-gods, to leaders, to corporate shenanigans, to what happened in the last 4 years, you name it, bogus medical advice, and the list is very, very long. And I teach my students, never believe a word I say, test it. If it doesn't work, come back to me. If you're doing it right and it's not working, as a teacher, it's my responsibility to figure out why, and I will. And fortunately, I don't teach things that I don't know already work, because I test them thoroughly before I teach them. Paleo Valley makes some incredible superfood bars that are a lot different than what most people think of as a superfood bar. I've got Autumn Smith, the creator of their superfood bars, right here to tell you about them. Autumn, what is so unique about your awesome superfood bars?
Well, our superfood bars are unique because not only do they not contain refined sugar or GMOs or any of the freaky additives that you'll find in most bars, or gluten or anything, but they're just whole foods. They're low in sugar. They're made with superfoods like ginger and broccoli and acerola cherry and collagen from grass-fed and finished animals, which we all know is like a fountain of youth. And so the best part about them, though, is probably the flavor. They come in chocolate and apple cinnamon, and we have so many more delicious flavors to come, and they're easy to put in your bag to feed for you with your kids. And I hope you love them all as much as I do.
To try Paleo Valley's scrumptious superfood bars in flavors such as lemon meringue, apple cinnamon, red velvet, and dark chocolate chip, go to paleovalley.com/Chek15 and save 15% on your purchase. No promo code is required. That's paleovalley.com/CHEK15.
Well, you just triggered another question in my mind about the idea of truth. There's a Hermetic principle that says all truths are but half truths. And well, I just wanted to ask you, it seems like we've got this thing happening where everybody says my truth, my truth. And is there one truth, or does everybody have their own truth?
Well, I think you have to, truth is always context dependent. For example, a lot of people would believe that God is good and good only. And most Christians believe that. And so then they create the devil to segregate everything other than what makes them happy from God. And so they don't realize by doing that, they're creating two gods, which creates an impasse, because then you got to say, well, who created the God of good if there's a God of evil? So at the level of duality, which we have to make consciousness, because you can't know up without down, in without out, good without bad, male without female, everything's a relative truth. It's relative that you're a male, and we only know Mark's a male because we have females that show us the difference, right? So truth is always context dependent. The truth of how to lift a weight properly, for example, there's 3 stages to an exercise: setup, execution, and follow through. And it's always true that if you're exercising, setup, execution, and follow through are essential, because if you set up incorrectly, you've already begun the execution incorrectly, and therefore the follow through is not likely to be correct either, and you're more likely to become somebody's patient and not fulfill your athletic abilities. But if we said, okay, is setup, execution, and follow through universally true? Well, inevitably we would say, well, for example, there are situations sexually where setup, foreplay, is not involved. If you're with the right woman, she says, quit the goofing around, let's just get it on. And the follow through, she may have some idea of that she needs flowers or something special to celebrate it, but some other girl may be happy just to throw her clothes on, go home, and say, I'll see you next time. So you see, truth is context dependent. Then you have to say, are there archetypal truths? Yes, there are archetypal truths. Good is good because it's good for everybody, but you have to be able to appreciate that from beyond duality, and that's very hard to do because the judging mind has to do it from a dualistic perspective. But if you get deep enough into yourself in meditation, or you get deep enough into a plant medicine ceremony, you will come into contact with these archetypes, and your experience will be something akin to a non-dual reality. And then we have to say, well, if God is God, then there has to be a universal truth, which is love. And love is the basis of all relationships, from subatomic particles all the way to the cosmos. What I'm trying to point out is that there's universal truths, but those universal truths have to be appreciated with a broad enough perspective that you can actually appreciate it outside of a dualistic truth. And then to go back to the God is good thing, I always remind people, if you look in the Christian Bible, Isaiah 45:7 says, I create the light and the dark, good and evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. Well, the Christians hate that Bible passage so much. About 30 years ago, they started rewriting it. And so in my library, I probably have 16 different Bibles. I can show you all throughout these Bibles where they change passages to fit their dogma. So there you see the truth gets manipulated by people that have an ulterior motive. So in summary, there is universal truths. Gravity is a universal truth. The 3 requisites for consciousness are space, time, and movement. That's a universal truth. There is a source to all that is. That's a universal truth. That doesn't mean you know what the source is, but there is a source to all that is. And then there's relative truths, and that's why we have lawyers, because once you get into the field of relative truth, you need somebody to defend you, because somebody can take the law that you thought was in your favor and turn it against you, as we found out in the last 4 years. So I hope that's an appropriate answer for you.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And it seems like, whenever I'm watching 2 people debate or arguing, like one person is getting very absolute and the other person responds by getting very relative. They open up the context and say, wait, if you just focus on that little thing, you're going to miss all these other things. And if you're really general in your argument, somebody's going to say, wait, give me a specific example.
That's why we have to educate ourselves both in breadth and depth. Because if we have a lot of depth but not a lot of breadth, then we can have what we think is a very profound truth, but not realize that it's very context dependent. And if we have a lot of breadth and not much depth, then we can see how things connect together, but not realize where certain things won't work with a certain degree of application. For example, a kid thinks you can tow something with your electric car by using a little piece of hemp, but doesn't realize that car, that you can't tow a normal car with that because it'll just snap. So they don't have enough depth of understanding to realize that the mass of a car requires a much bigger rope to tow it. So as a simple analogy, in order to, the more truth you want to have access to, the more depth of knowledge and the more breadth of knowledge you have to have, or you can become very confused as to why your truth is causing you so much pain. And all you got to do is look at the structure stages that religion and consciousness goes through with regard to religion. The lowest level of scriptural interpretation is egocentric or literal. And that's where you get absolute truths from. So this is exactly what God wants. This is exactly what must happen, or you're going to burn in hell. That's an absolute truth. But as you grow from literal egocentric to ethnocentric, then you have my group against your group. So within the group, all the absolutists that are reading literally all of a sudden find that even in their own group, people have different interpretations and they don't agree with each other. And this is exactly why right now you can do the research on this yourself in a few minutes. There are 45,000 branches of Christianity, all claiming to have the authentic teachings of Jesus. So that's what happens when you have an absolute truth. But because an absolute truth can only be interpreted relatively through the individual's own mind, you get different interpretations of it. And then when you are absolutist about your interpretation, then you have the basis of the founding of a new religion. and off it goes from there.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah, you just reminded me of a few quotes I really like. One is, there are two types of people in the world: those who are humble and those who are about to be humbled. Yeah. And then the other one you reminded me of is that there are two types of fools: those who take religion literally and those who believe it has no value. So it's kind of like the absolutists on both sides there.
Well, and I would add to that, because I'm a deep student of and teacher of tarot, the archetype of the fool is 0 in tarot. It's the beginning of the journey. So I always tell my students and my patients there's two kinds of fools: the immature fool and the wise fool. The wise fool is the one that everybody thinks is crazy and nobody agrees with, who dances naked in the rain and tells you that psychedelics used properly are good for you and is way, way ahead of the power curve, but acts in ways that, if emulated intelligently, will lead to enlightenment. The immature fool is the one who drinks a bunch of alcohol or gets stoned and tries to convince everybody else that they can drive home and they'll prove it to you. And the next thing you know, they've wiped out a family and they're in the hospital and they spend the rest of their life in jail. So there's two kinds of fools: the immature fool and the wise fool. And the wise fool takes a long time to develop and usually goes through the school of hard knocks very deeply.
Yeah, my wife is really into tarot. She has a massive YouTube channel as well. And
oh, great.
I had never been into tarot at all before I met her, but I do love the symbolism.
Oh man, it's awesome.
I helped her design the cover of her book, and we decided to draw the fool on the cover. And I love that the image of him just stepping off the cliff.
Oh, well, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I don't know, it inspires me to just kind of like, don't worry about being wrong so much. Don't wait for things to be perfect. You just got to step off and have faith that you're going to land somewhere that's going to be good for your soul.
I didn't know your wife was into tarot. I'll tell you what, as a gift to you, I will see if Penny can access my most recent tarot workshop. It's 28 hours of training, and it's tarot for soul guidance. So it's not anything like she'll ever have come across.
She would love that.
And I'll give it to her as a gift.
Oh, she would love that. And she's got an 800-page book on tarot, just defining each card.
What's her name?
Her name's Leanna, but her YouTube channel is called Gem Goddess.
Okay, great. Because I was thinking, God, maybe he's married to Benabel Wen. Have you ever heard of Benabel Wen?
No.
Well, your wife probably knows who she is. Ask your wife if she knows
Yeah.
who Benabel Wen is, and look that name up on Amazon, and you'll meet a tarot master like you've never seen.
Benabel Wen. Okay. I'm sure she knows her. Yeah, my wife's YouTube channel is the biggest tarot reading channel on YouTube. It's got almost
That's
a
amazing.
million subscribers almost.
Oh, great. Well, I'll be super excited to share my training with her, because I think it'll really open her whole mind to a completely different way to use tarot.
Here's an interesting question for you. So her audience is like 99% female. Why does the psychic side of spirituality kind of resonate with females so much more than males?
Because females, first of all, females have 30% more commissurial fibers connecting their left and right brain hemispheres. So they're actually capable of processing a lot more information, both internally and environmentally, than men. That's why I tell men all the time, if you think that you can cheat on your wife and get away with it, you're a goddamn fool. Because she can smell more than you, she can read more than you, she can see more than you. The best thing you can do is always tell your wife the truth, or your days are numbered. 2, being female, women are more oriented toward agape love. Men are more oriented toward eros. Eros is penetrate and create novelty, penetrate and create novelty. Agape is hold the family together, keep the circle, nurture. A woman's oriented, all life there's 4 things we have to do to maintain life: feed, clean, nurture, and protect. We might bring home the money, but she gets the groceries. Men were normally hunters, but women had much closer contact with plants and animals in the local environment. They were much more oriented toward cleaning. They were much more oriented toward nurturing. And then the father is more the protector. So women are, of the 4 key functions, clean, feed, nurture, and protect, women are commonly the cleaners, the feeders, and the nurturers. Men are just usually out hunting and protecting. So a woman's actually got her hands and her sense of awareness on about 75% more of life than a man does. And so the woman is oriented towards being very sensitive to feelings, because feelings actually have more value for survival than relative truths do. Because ideas can be powerful, but can detach you from an emotional truth. So I could go on a long expose of that. But the reality of it is most women have much more connection to their right brain hemisphere, which is the hemisphere of wholeness. And because of that, they're able to actually see through and perceive through and feel things that most men are completely blocked to. And because men have a tendency to need to fit into some kind of a tribe or some kind of a group in order to establish a sense of identity, there is much more insecurity for a man to come and say, hey, man, check out my tarot cards, because if he's afraid that he'll be ridiculed for that and he's not strong enough to stand in his own shoes yet, which means he has to have some level of individuation and self-love and self-respect and not need other people's validation, then any kind of idea outside the group is going to be, shall we say, repressed or avoided. But women will sit around the table and say, hey, I tried this on my kid's diaper rash and it worked. And it could be something wild and crazy, like I used butter. They won't say, oh, well, God, did you do medical research on that? You say, well, shit, if it worked, I'm going to try it. So the women are much more connected to what I would call practical reality. So when women go exploring things, they're much more connected to their emotions and their feelings, and whether or not other people agree with it or not, if the rash went away, it went away. And so I think women are much better at testing new concepts and exploring new avenues with an open heart, where men are usually directed by their intellect, and the intellect is very dangerous. Enzymes are one of the most important things we can use to supplement our diet. Very few people have normal levels of digestive enzymes. It's extremely common to be digestive enzyme deficient because so many people are eating cooked foods, processed foods, packaged foods, etc. The best digestive enzymes I've ever found are Masszymes by Bioptimizers. And one of the things I like about them is not only are they the most advanced technology for how they're produced, the science behind them, but I take them on an empty stomach every morning and every night as proteolytic enzymes to help clean my body. So I've got Wade here, who's the formulator of these enzymes, to tell us how do they work as digestive and proteolytic enzymes, because today I think we really need to be supplementing with high quality enzymes. So Wade, what's unique about Masszymes?
Well, one of the interesting things is undigested protein is one of the biggest contaminants that cause problem for people, whether it's in their blood or inflammatory conditions or even impairing recovery. And it's quite common amongst athletes who have high protein diets, interesting enough, who are looking to add recovery, but they're not breaking down their protein effectively. And that was my case way back in the day as a former bodybuilding champion. So we set about cultivating and developing an enzyme formulation that handled all of the amino acids in a pH range from 2 to 12, as well as providing an assortment of assistant enzymes. In other words, it doesn't just break down protein, it handles carbohydrates, it handles fats, it handles fibers, a variety of different things, and they work synergistically together to make sure that you can break down just about any food and digest it properly. Now, when you talk about the difference between enzymes, there's digestive enzymes and systemic enzymes. Systemic enzymes such as like nattokinase or serrapeptase. Well, they don't help break down digestion, but they can break down inflammation or inflammatory conditions, undigested proteins, or scarring tissue inside the body. Well, it turns out when you take Masszymes on an empty stomach, it works exactly the same way. It will go into the bloodstream and now works as a systemic enzyme, reducing inflammation, accelerating recovery times. Matt just tore his Achilles tendon and made a full recovery after surgery within a few weeks, which they expected for many months. He was taking as many as 100 a day. Now, I'm not suggesting people do that, but this was an extreme condition. And the bottom line is Masszymes is great for recovery, for cleaning up undigested proteins in the system, as well for digesting just about any meal. If this isn't the best digestive enzyme or systemic enzyme that you've ever taken, you get your money back. That's the Bioptimizer guarantee.
And this month, you don't even have to buy Masszymes to try it. Bioptimizers is giving you your first bottle of Masszymes for free. Just go to masszymes.com/Paul-free to get your free bottle. That's masszymes.com/Paul-free to get a bottle of Masszymes for free.
You reminded me of sacred geometry. I here's the flower of life with all circles, 19 circles. To me, I've been told this was a fully feminine image because it's all curved lines.
Yes.
And then this is the masculine, the straight lines that kind of add the fabric of reality out of the formless. So these two complement each other, and you can't really have reality without both of them. But yeah, I love breaking things down into this like really spiritual, ethereal base.
They're both actually masculine and feminine from my perspective as an artist and someone that studies this and practices metaphysics. But if you hold up the feminine, are you familiar with the symbol of the self, which is the circle with the dot in the center? It's also the symbol for the sun in alchemy.
I can imagine what you're talking about, but I don't know the story behind it.
Okay, well, there's a lot of different ways to go about it. It's in alchemy. It's in various religions. But if you study Tantra, Shakti, the feminine of God, the divine feminine, is symbolized as a circle. And in Tantra, God as Shakti wants a partner to experience love and life and companionship with. So the story goes that Shakti wants a lover, a consort, a husband, and a friend. And so she dreams him up. His name is Shiva. So the circle is the divine womb. It's the emptiness of God, and it's the emptiness of God that creates the desire to experience itself, because there is nothing but God to experience. So Shakti dreams her consort, her lover, her friend, and her husband up, and he is the first manifestation of creation, which is the dot in the center of the circle, because it's being projected out of the emptiness of the womb. So Shiva represents the created world. Shakti represents the wave dimension of quantum physics, or the spiritual dimension where you can't weigh or measure anything because it's moving too fast for our instrumentation. So that's the domain of mind. That's the domain of emotion. That's the domain of potential. That's the domain of probability. But the particle domain is the domain of something weighable, measurable, or tangible. That's the masculine expression. So when you look at what you've just held up, you've got a circle. By the way, the flower of life is the symbol for zero, that for which there is no other unconditional love. But notice in each case, you've got, in your right hand, you've got many circles with points in the middle. So each of the circles represents the womb of God manifesting something in creation. The total of manifestation is the principle of the one in Spirit Gym, which is being itself. All manifestation, no matter whether it's a subatomic particle all the way to a cosmos. So you see that the circle is the womb, and the point is the point of expression, the beginning and the end of any possible thing that can exist in a field of time. The masculine one that you have, which has the lines on it, still has to have come from somewhere. So if you draw a circle around it, you still have to have a womb, because only the feminine principle can give birth to. But notice that it too has circles and points throughout it. So the feminine principle represents the emptiness. The masculine principle represents the fullness. And so those two objects that you're holding both have solid form, masculine, and they're both only perceptible because of the empty spaces that exist, or there would be no pattern to perceive. And that shows up everywhere in your body. And what's an atom? 99.999, I think, to the 12th decimal point empty, ninth decimal point empty, yet it appears to us to be solid, but really it's just a vortex of potential. And so it's mostly feminine with a tiny bit of masculine. And that tiny bit of masculine is what makes a table hard and a body have border, barrier, and definition. And some of your organs are empty. Your bladder has to be an empty organ to hold pee. Your colon has to be empty to hold food. Your lungs have to be empty to hold air, but your liver's solid. Your spleen is solid. Your kidneys are solid. So in Chinese medicine, the empty organs are the feminine. The full organs are the masculine. And the two of them work together to create life. And then you've got the elements, earth and water are feminine, fire and air are masculine. So you see these two principles everywhere, and that's the two qualities of God. God as unconditional love can only be no thing, emptiness, feminine, and everything, fullness, the masculine. So no matter what you do, God says hello either way you go, and you cannot ever exclude the masculine or the feminine, or you can't have life.
That's brilliantly put. Have you ever heard the idea that sacred geometry maps onto Genesis in the Bible?
Yes, I've Robert Gilbert, who's one of the top sacred geometry experts in the world, has been on my podcast 2 times, and phenomenal podcast, very, very well received. And he's got a great series on Gaia on sacred geometry. He goes through the whole thing. But yes, there's many different interpretations, from sacred geometry to the Hebrew letters and the numerological correlations to them. I've probably got at least 4 different interpretations of Genesis through different mindsets.
Yeah, I did one video on the story of creation through sacred geometry, and we went through like the first few lines of the King James Bible.
Yeah.
And it's just beautiful to hear the language as you see these shapes unfold, and it follows it beautifully. It's like, let there be light. You see the Vesica Pisces, and the light shines through, and it becomes like an eye. And then it's like 6 days of creation. and it's like the 6 circles around the one circle. And yeah, it just unfolds beautifully, and it kind of almost just massages your brain as you're watching it.
Yes, I've got several books on sacred geometry in my library that go through that sequence. And I think I saw that video that you did on After School. That was on After School, right?
Right.
Because I remember that distinctly. And again, saying, good job. Because I've studied a lot. So when I'm watching videos, if they're making mistakes, I go, well, it was a good video, but too bad that was wrong, when I say that, I say it as an educated person, not as some idiot just, being judgmental. Usually if I say something's wrong, I can back it up with about 40 references.
Well, if I ever make a mistake, let me know, because I've definitely made a lot of mistakes.
Well, the thing is, I make mistakes too. I think there's 2 kinds of mistakes. There's the mistakes of heading in the right direction, but none of us can have enough expertise to know everything. And then there's the mistakes of having a dogmatic belief and not realizing that your belief is just so far out of alignment with the truth that we need to detox you from that belief system.
What's in the bag?
I got some, Penny made this for me. So some nice clean tobacco grown without chemicals, some organic herbs, some Dr. Nick's essential oil wizardry essential oils, and some animal essences from my friend Daniel Maple, who makes these mind-blowing animal essences. He channels the essence of the animal into the water.
Wow.
And it's just freaking crazy. I got a great podcast with Daniel Maple. It's freaking awesome, man. And so I put together the combination. As an alchemist, I'm always experimenting. So whatever I need to support, whether it be sharpening my mind or relaxing or going into meditation or enhancing inner vision, I know what to do.
Hell yeah.
Mark, we're having a hell of a lot of fun, man. But did you finish telling us the story about your background and your art skills? I remember you talked about winning the art contest and then your kind of journey out of the corporate world. And thank God you felt that emptiness, because, the world has benefited greatly from your being in touch with your soul. Is there more you want to share before we go into this long list of amazing things I want to talk to you about?
Oh, hell yeah. Yeah, well, I'm just being selfish right now. I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to talk to the great Paul Chek.
You can ask me any question you want.
People pay millions of dollars to do this, and I'm like, I'm not going to waste time talking about myself.
Well, look, I love hearing about you. I think you're fascinating. That's why I was so excited to get you on the show. I mean, I'm an art therapist, so I actually can look at a person's art and learn a lot about them. And so from a spiritual perspective, I already know that you're quite an enlightened human being, whether you agree with me or not. I'll say, well, I'm right, because I do this for a living.
I can't argue with that. Yeah, I guess a little bit more of my story. I had really awesome parents that encouraged me in very different ways.
Thank the Lord for that.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Mom and Dad.
Yeah, my mom taught me all about discipline and order, and my dad was all about chaos and just creativity and kind of like follow your dreams, shoot for the stars, and be a big risk taker.
Awesome.
And my mom, if my mom wasn't there, I wouldn't be clothed and I wouldn't have any manners. I'd be on the streets for sure. I actually recently told my parents this. I said, oh, if it wasn't for Mom, I'd be on the streets doing drugs somewhere. I'd be an addict. And my dad was like, but you'd be the best damn addict there is.
That's a great combination, right?
So that's my parents in a nutshell.
There you have just put the Tai Chi symbol together in your mom and dad. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, my mom's Japanese, so I've got that, kind of peaceful cherry blossom inspiration in my artwork, and my dad is white. Mystery there. Who knows what he actually is, but he was a serial entrepreneur. And so my whole upbringing, he was constantly experimenting with different products and really random things. He had a cigar company, ice cream company. He made ice cream tacos. We made like a custom toilet bowl company, t-shirt, all these random things. And I think that greatly inspired me to just experiment around and tinker. Like if you look at the topics on After School, they're to somebody that might just show up to the channel and take a bird's eye view, it might look like a lot of random things. But I kind of look at all the videos as part of like this upside down vortex that's leading towards this unified vision of like oneness. And I look at each video as like a part of a body. Some videos are really important part that gets a lot of press. You have like the eyes, but every video is critical to the body, but some are maybe not as flashy. One might be the spleen, or I don't know, the pinky toe. But I look at each video as like a different part of this body that I'm building.
That's great. Speaking of the toilet, do you know the name of the man that invented the modern toilet that we sit on and use that fucks us up so badly?
No.
Thomas Crapper.
Really?
Yeah. How funny is that, eh?
So the toilet messes us up?
Yeah. The reason the toilet messes us up is because the sigmoid colon, which is the distal end of the colon that becomes the anus, takes a bend, quite a bend right in front of the left groin. We're the only animal in nature that poops with our spine fairly vertical. We're the only ones that have to pump fecal material uphill against gravity because we stand up in the field of gravity. All the other animals have a horizontal spine, so they don't have to force fecal material up against gravity around a corner through the horizontal aspect of the colon, transcending colon, and then down into the descending colon into the sigmoid. So if we don't squat down, our postural muscles won't turn off. And since your anal sphincter is a postural muscle, it's part of your pelvic floor. You have two anal sphincters, the external and then the internal. The internal is smooth muscle, so it's governed by the visceral system. And when the colon has stretch receptors in it, so when the fecal material builds up, it activates the stretch receptors, which inhibits the internal anal sphincter. That's why you squeeze your butt cheeks together when you got to take a poop. And we all know when a kid's got to take a crap because they got that look on their face like they're about to lose it. So in nature, what we have to do is we have to squat down until we're at a rest position with our torso resting on our thighs. And that pressurizes the sigmoid colon. The left thigh actually squeezes it like squeezing a toothpaste tube will force toothpaste out of it. But as soon as you sit on a toilet, you don't have that pressure on the colon anymore. So it really facilitates a huge amount of constipation. So having studied the history of constipation, the degree of constipation in human beings shot through the roof once the modern toilet was built because we no longer squatted down. And if you don't squat down and relax, then your postural muscles stay turned on. So kids often have a very hard time pooping because they're so scared of being over this big hole. They sit upright, and that activates their core muscles, which includes the pelvic floor. So the external anal sphincter won't shut off because it's part of the postural system. So once we stop squatting down on the ground to poop, because of the modern toilet, we develop all sorts of health problems because that fecal material gets trapped in the body, rots, parasites hatch, bad bacteria hatches, and it starts to poison the body. And that's why many people have a little footstool, like I have them in all our toilets here, so that if you use a modern toilet, you can put your feet up on this stool that's about 8 or 10 inches tall, and it puts you in the same position you would be in nature so that it pushes. And then if you bend forward, it puts pressure on the sigmoid colon, which is right where your left thigh bumps up against your abdomen, and it squeezes the fecal material out.
Have you ever seen a Thai toilet?
No, but I know a lot of countries all over the world, billions of people just poop in a hole in the ground.
Yeah, I've been to Thailand quite a few times in Southeast Asia, and their toilets are basically just like a platform that you stand on. It's like a glorified hole. Those people can sit like that or be in that position all day long. They can play cards and they can eat their meals in this, fully squatted position.
Yeah, that's because they haven't lost their natural flexibility from sitting in chairs and using toilets and doing all that stuff. I've had to investigate all these things because I'm a holistic health practitioner, so people come to me with every problem under the sun. And I always ask the question, what causes that, until I get to the bottom of things. And so I did a lot of research into the toilet and why we were having all these problems. And so that's how I know this information. And of course, I studied anatomy for many, 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 many years and did many cadaver dissections to actually see this stuff and look at the viability of it from an anatomical perspective. But sorry for the segue on the toilet there.
I love that. And I found what you just said really interesting, that you work with cadavers. And I've never done that with human cadavers, but I think that is somehow very important to the psychology of a creator, is to work with because I heard Alex Gray talk about that. It was a big part of his evolution was working in a morgue and, taking apart these bodies, and you can really see it in his work that he has
Yes.
such a deep knowledge of every vein and tendon and how it all works together.
Yeah. I did 5 cadaver dissections. And one of the reasons I did it, since we're on the topic, is I became trained as a certified neuromuscular therapist. I finished my training in 1989. And I was also one of the few that got to go through the pelvic floor training before the legal medical board shut them down. So I'm trained to do internal pelvic floor work to treat people that have all sorts of problems, such as coccyx trauma, birthing trauma, sexual trauma, because very few therapists know how to do that work. I also did very extensive work on the temporomandibular joint, the muscles of the tongue and the throat and the anterior spinal muscles. But some of the techniques that were taught, I doubted they could actually do what they said they do, because I knew enough about the anatomy to know it wasn't likely possible to reach that muscle. But the instructor argued with me about it. And so I enrolled myself in cadaver dissections specifically so I could do these techniques on cadavers and then cut the material away to see if I could actually touch, for example, the lateral pterygoid or the anterior suboccipital muscles or the longus capitis, longus coli, et cetera, et cetera. And so I needed to test on a body that I could actually excavate the anatomy one layer at a time to see if it was actually physically possible to do these techniques. That was one of my reasons, because I just couldn't take things at face value, because I knew enough to see that I didn't want to mislead myself in thinking that I was actually treating a certain muscle or tissue when physically it was impossible, because I worked with surgeons all the time. And if I couldn't prove to them it was true, then they would just think I was an idiot and blow me off, and I wouldn't get referrals from them. And I was in arguments with surgeons about stuff like this constantly. And so I just became a very dangerous guy to start debating shit like this with, because I took the time and the effort to do a lot of research and test things on cadavers to make sure they worked.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'd love to. I think it'd probably be pretty good for my artistic style, my development, to work with some cadavers. I've always been really into these anatomy books, and I love drawing like the body in different contorted positions, like or athletes or muscles. Or I think it's a really good. It really helps inform your artistic practice to know like how the skeleton moves, and that applies to animals as well. Like if you know how their bones move, you're going to make an animal that looks good.
Yeah, if you come to my place sometime, I've got a bunch of models, including an entire torso, which you can remove every organ one at a time, so you can actually see, feel, know how they fit inside. I've always used a lot of models to teach my students and to reinforce my own memory of things, because the body is very, very complicated. You got 400 pairs of muscles, 120 something joints. The nervous system's very complicated. So, it's a long study, but very rewarding. I think this gets into something where we're going to talk about later, but when you realize that every part of the body is actually an icon or a symbol for something that's spiritually true. For example, every single vertebra in the spinal column has a spiritual reality connected to it. And if you look into the metaphysics of the anatomy, then you can actually learn a lot about how spirit manifests itself in form. And so you can correlate anatomy. For example, in my new Spirit Gym book series, I show the structure of the mouth and the tongue and show how the mouth itself is the feminine principle and the tongue is the masculine principle, and that you could not make sound or form words without the male and female aspects of the mouth as a working system. And so I show a whole bunch about, not only do I show that, but I show if you look at the tube torus, which, for example, the magnetic field of the earth, you got the North Pole, energy flows down the center, out the South Pole, and that turns out to be the same with the sun, with every planet, and models from science show it. That's how the whole universe is constructed. So I take the image of the mouth and turn it on its side and say, now look at this picture of a tube torus side by side with the mouth, and you see it's perfectly represented in the mouth structure. And so I show that the human being is really a fractal expression of the whole universe from top to bottom.
Yeah, I'd love to learn more about this. It sounds
Well,
deep.
hang out, bud.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Have you ever wondered why your blood is red? It's because it's full of oxygen and life force. It's what keeps you going. But what if I could tell you about something else that's red that will add more life force and keep you going? And if you start with a red juice before you have coffee or tea and wait a few minutes, you might find that you either don't need the coffee or the tea, or you need less of it. But this time, instead of getting coffee and tea, you got a lot of nutrition and a lot of great stuff for stress management and detoxification. And it's so important. I got Drew Canoli. It took me 2 years to get him to come hang out with me and talk about this. I said, Drew, tell me more about your red juice. And he is right here to tell us what is on with your red juice. My kids love it. Everybody I know loves it.
Well, I love that we have it for kids, because
Yes.
when I was a kid, there was this big red dude that would burst through a brick wall, and he was like, oh, yeah. And he would feed me a glass of 50 grams of sugar, giving most people diabetes,
Yeah.
ADHD,
Yeah.
addiction,
Obesity.
all the things, right?
Yeah.
So when we created Red, it was, what's the alternative?
Mhm.
If we could create something that could create lasting stamina, lasting energy, and then we started to look at our ancient ancestors.
Mhm.
We talk about the Vikings, the
Mhm.
people that were rowing across the oceans
Oceans.
for days
Yeah.
to go to war.
Yeah.
What were they taking? Well, they were taking rhodiola.
Yeah.
Rhodiola is in our red juice.
Yeah.
And then we were like, okay, so out of all the mushrooms,
Yeah.
what's one of the best medicinal mushrooms that can give us long-lasting energy?
Mm.
We found cordyceps. Cordyceps are absolutely amazing.
Yes.
Not just any cordyceps or rhodiola, glyphosate residue-free and organic.
Mhm.
And how can we make it taste better than the, oh yeah, how do we make it taste better than that without the sugar?
Yeah.
We added a little monk fruit.
Monk
And we-
fruit's amazing.
Yep, and we found the best berries on the planet.
Mm.
Berries in high amounts, which we have in the red juice, actually help increase stem cell creation in your body.
Mm.
What's better than that for our little ones and for us?
Yes.
And so many people are just lethargic. They're lacking energy.
Yes.
What could we do for that? Red juice in the afternoon, 2 p.m. rolls around, instead of a nap, instead of the coffee, drink the red juice. You're going to feel so much better.
Well, if you need the nap, take the nap if you can, but then take the red juice to kick you back into gear.
Exactly. I love naps and I love coffee.
I do too, but I love to make sure I got the nutrition in me first. The other thing is berries are a natural stimulant to the adrenal glands. So if people would do a little red juice before they do coffee and tea, they would pick themselves up naturally, except this time they're bringing in nutrition. And unfortunately, coffee blocks almost every vitamin and mineral you can put in your mouth. So, hey, there you have it, right from the man himself.
To try Organifi's red juice and get 20% off your order, go to Organifi.com/Chek20 and use the promo code Chek20 at checkout. That's Organifi.com/CHEK20 and the promo code is CHEK20 for a 20% discount.
Art has been pivotal for communicating essential messages to and among human beings for a very long time. We have cave paintings dated as far back as 85,000 years. Art has been essential in conveying myths and mythical truths, religious and spiritual teachings, and even distortions of the truth, such as propaganda and dogma. Art has been used to open and influence the unconscious mind in both esoteric and esoteric aspects of human life. Art's used in sales and marketing to tell both truth and lies. Art's used as a means of creating beauty and helping humanity stay connected to core archetypes such as good, beauty, and truth. So with that preface, Mark, can you share your thoughts on the importance of and the role of art in general and what you feel is most important for humanity to understand about art?
That's a great question. Well,
I didn't want you to get bored.
it seems like information or consciousness affects beliefs. Beliefs inform culture. Culture informs civilization. And art is something that really evolves our consciousness. Alex Gray's talked about this quite a bit.
Yes.
And right now, I think our culture has it very twisted where art is like chasing culture. Art is dragging behind. I'm seeing a lot of like movies and things that aren't resonating because they're trying to pander or they're trying to be political or something. And that's not the role of art. It's not to make some political statement hidden within a movie. The best movies I can think of are like Shawshank Redemption or Lord of the Rings. And these things had such a big impact on generations. And then you look at the downstream effect on culture, and you have an entire generation of people who love Lord of the Rings and are inspired by those stories, and it deeply resonates with them. And yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought there, but
Well, I think what I hear you saying is that good art accesses the archetypal realm, so it opens doors in the psyche to higher truths. But if art is actually being used to take your mind in a direction that is the opposite of evolution or expansion of consciousness, then the tool that could be used to grow our consciousness and our spiritual awareness of connection to a progressively greater whole actually has a reversion effect and dumbs us down, numbs us down, and turns us into somebody else's play toy.
that was perfectly said. And
That's just what I interpreted from what you were saying.
You said it far better than I could. So what I see as the role of the artist is to go out and experience as many things as you can. Go deep into the psychedelic realm and pull those visions out and bring them into this realm. And yeah, the role of the creator is to take all your experiences and kind of synthesize them into this one unified vision that people can see. And so you can paint something as simple as like a doorknob, but you can paint it in a way where like nobody's ever looked at a doorknob like that before. And you can make anything extraordinary and beautiful. And yeah, another thing about art is that throughout history, it seems like the role of the artist was to create something that was from like the formless realm, or create something that is a perfect ideal. It's something that we aspire to. We're always going to fall short of our ideals. But as long as we're striving in that direction, we're oriented in that direction, we're living in harmony with nature or God or our purpose. Back to the truth thing that we were talking about earlier is I think everybody's got this idea of like my truth, and we're going in all different directions. And that's kind of what abstract art and modern art looks like to me. It's like I look at it and it's just a blank piece of canvas with nothing on it. And it requires somebody's extreme context and deep explanation to say why this is worth $1 million. Where I'm looking at this and I'm like, I don't get it. This is not beautiful to me. But when you go to like a cathedral, it's universally beautiful because they are creating these perfect ideals that we can orient towards. And the whole thing is oriented towards the heavens.
It also induces a sense of awe. I've watched countless documentaries on artists, and I've seen paintings that sell for millions of dollars, and it looks like childish gibberish to me. And I'm having the same thought. How in the world does anyone find that beautiful? I'm very confused as to what's happening to the psyche of humanity. And so, but the point I'm elaborating on is like, if you look at the works of Michelangelo, any of it, especially inside, things like the Sistine Chapel, whatever, the first thing that happens to me is I go into a sense of awe for two reasons. One, it's so beautiful and so deep, it takes you into a journey, almost like a psychedelic medicine does. And two, you're like, this guy is a human being just like I am, but he's exemplifying a level of artistic ability that is awe-inspiring, just to know that another human being is capable of that. And I think that's what happens to me when I look inside the Egyptian temples and see what's in there. And, you're like, Jesus, Murphy, any one of these sculptures could have taken years to create. My mother's a very skilled sculptor, so I know what it takes to create good sculpture. And when you see temples that are just full of this stuff and they're just adorned, or you see like some of these Islamic mosques, my God, the art that some of these Islamic artists do is just one of my friends, he goes by Yahuma. I have a podcast with him. His art is absolutely freaking out of this world, and he does it all freehand. He doesn't even use tools, and it looks precise and beautiful. So my point that I'm sort of jumping in with is I think that good art inspires awe, and it's transcendent. It takes you out of yourself and it gives you an experience. And that's what I love about Alex Gray's art. whether you're smoking pot or doing mushrooms or just looking at it, if you're alive, you're inspired by that. You're like, who in the world can paint with that precision and detail? And there's always a beautiful story being told in good art.
Absolutely. And I love that you brought up Egypt, because when I was there recently for the first time, the creations are just so big and grand and symmetrical and perfect that a lot of people go there and they try to figure out how it was made or why they did it. But going there for the first time, I couldn't even worry about any of those questions. I just had to have that feeling of awe, and it makes you feel like possibilities are endless. It's very inspiring. Whereas when you look at the opposite of that, I would say like a modern city where everything is very like cheaply built. Everything is kind of temporary. It's built, as quickly and as efficiently as possible with the cheapest materials available. And it makes you feel kind of like temporary and cheap and like you're meaningless. You walk through those straight lines of the city and it affects your consciousness in the opposite way. When you see these like pyramids that took many, many generations to build, you kind of feel like you're part of something eternal, the opposite of that feeling.
Yeah. And I think too, as you're describing the cities are mirroring back to us our patriarchal pathology, the dominance of the patriarchy, the masculine, because, it reminds me of my studies of the Native American Indians. And one of the things that Joseph Rael talks about, are you familiar with Joseph Rael at all?
Mm-mm.
Oh my God, you would love his art. Joseph Rael. Search his name on Amazon. He was an amazing artist, Mark, and he was a very powerful shaman, an expert at creating sound chambers and healing. He did the sun dance, I think 4 times, which, you know what the sun dance is, right?
No.
4 days, nonstop, no food, no water. And these guys all become breatharians. They don't have to eat. They can power themselves through breath. Joseph Rael says he just chose to eat because he loves the social engagement of eating with people. But Joseph Rael was a very, very powerful shaman. He might still be alive, but he's very, very old now. But I've got all of his books, and I reference him in my Spirit Gym series. I've studied all of his works. There's also a series of videos on Amazon. It's not cheap, but it's a synthesis of his teachings. It's like a 5 video set you can get on DVD. I don't know, most people don't have DVD players, but it's worth it. But Joseph Rael's art is amazing. But anyhow, the point I'm driving at is what the Native American Indians found is that when they were taken off their land and out of their teepees, which, as you know, are round at the base and conical, and they move energy just like nature does. And they said when we were put into square buildings, it made us sick because the energy gets stuck in there and it doesn't breathe. And so when you have all these squares and very masculine shapes, you have this energy that gets trapped and it doesn't flow. And so you see that the patriarchal influence is actually showing up in our architecture. And if you study the work of Ibrahim Karim, he does amazing things where he goes into like schools where kids are having a lot of trouble with attention deficit disorder and all sorts of health problems. And he uses his science of biogeometry. And I've seen he'll just take something very simple and go to a corner and make the corner so energy flows around a corner. So imagine putting something in the corner of a room that has a feminine curve to it. And he shows that these small changes change the flow of the energy. And he's got lots of research showing that kids' minds turn on. All of a sudden they can think again. So I think that what you're describing about this deadness and this sort of linear, non-natural aspect of how we do architecture in cities is actually part of the problem that we're having at a psychological and physical level, because we are intimate with our environment, as you know.
Yeah, you're making me really think about how I approach like looking at lines. And for instance, like all day I look at a computer that has a bunch of straight lines, and my window's a straight line, the room I'm in has a bunch of straight lines. But whenever I take a break, I try to go out into the forest behind my house and just look at everything that's not a straight line. Just like soak that in as much as possible. And I think architects and people that design places that humans go are very aware of this. Like when you look at a spa, like a nice spa will always have like a curving path that goes into it. So it kind of like brings you into this different state of mind. And when you look at like a Japanese tea garden or a park, it's not like a grid pattern. They always have these really elegant, like squiggly paths. And it just puts you in this very different state. Like, okay, it's not about getting to point B. It's about enjoying the present moment for a bit.
Yes. And, there's a great book. If you've never heard of it, it'll blow your mind. It's called The Sacred Spiral by Jill Peirce. And she's Rupert Sheldrake's wife, and she is an expert at chanting and toning and healing with the voice. And she's very tapped in artistically as well. But she shows that the spiral is the fundamental pattern of creation in the universe. And that and many other sources, energy in nature never travels in a straight line. It just never does. And it's not the most efficient path either. We think it is mathematically, but it isn't. And there's actually a number of books that talk about this. But Lao Tzu really gave us the big tip. When you look at the Tai Chi symbol, the yin-yang symbol, you got the black fish, which is yin, chasing the white fish in a circle. But between them, you see this pattern that's an S, which is the flow of spirit. So he's showing you that in nature, spirit actually flows in this curvilinear, like not straight, but curved path. And it's interesting too, because if you study the history of God, the first thing that people worshipped as God was trees, because they saw that trees were the source of food and were the source of shelter for most of life, and that we couldn't get by without trees. Then they thought it was the lingam and the yoni, which is, for those of you that don't know those terms, lingam is the penis, yoni is the vagina, because whenever those two met in any creature, it produced new life. So they thought, God is these sex organs. But then they began to worship serpents, because they stood on top of mountains and saw all rivers made a track through nature like a serpent leaves on the ground. And they saw that when heat waves rose up from the ground, they didn't go straight. They moved in this serpentine pattern. They saw when wind hit sand dunes and beaches, it made wave patterns like a serpent. So they begin to notice that this serpentine pattern, when you look at veins of metal through rock, it's in this serpentine type pattern or in a root branching pattern. So they actually then believed that God was the serpent, but not just the snake like a snake. But you see temples like the pyramids in Mexico have the rattlesnake, and they were worshiping the serpent. But the serpent snake is a symbol, not for this animal, but for the fact that spirit, life force energy moves in these serpentine patterns. So it's very interesting. And I have a beautiful map in my library that I'll show you when you're here. And it's the history of all the religions. And it goes all the way back to their origins in shamanism. And it shows what people worshipped at different stages, all the way back over 10,000 years ago. And how, as we awoke to deeper truths, that our beliefs about what God was changed, then they started to worship fire, because they saw that fire could transform things and do magical things, and it could kill and it could create. Then they worshiped the sun, because they realized that without the sun, nothing would be alive here. And then it goes on from there, and that's when we got into trouble with religious systems of belief. But the key thing is that they all worship things in nature that were somehow generative. They produced something more. And so I think what you're describing is really probably a deep unconscious realization that the deeper truth of ourselves is expressed in these curving patterns, and that God is not a Euclidean geometer.
Have you stopped to wonder who is looking through our eyes and who is speaking to us behind and between the thoughts that seem to be our own? These feelings and deep questions are the voice of our spirit, our soul, calling us to become whole and telling us to tune into our inner compass that identifies and guides us to our unique true north. If you are ready to meet and develop an intimate relationship with your spirit soul, or to deepen the connection you already have, then the upcoming workshop, Beyond Ego into Soul Guidance, is for you. Over the course of 2 days, Paul and Angie Chek will guide you through exercises that sensitize you to your spirit soul and show you how to make direct contact with your unconscious, soul, and spirit or higher self. You can attend in person at Paul and Angie's Rainbow House in California or virtually online from anywhere in the world. If you are ready to develop the spiritual courage to put your ego self in the back seat and let your soul be your guide, then join us on August the 30th and 31st for Beyond Ego into Soul Guidance. Go to paulchek.com/events for more information and to register. That's paulchek.com/events.
I think we're attracted to this ebb and flow, this contrast, the ups and downs. Like whenever you hear a story about something that is just very linear, like a rich kid got rich and he kept doing well and he had a big house. It's like there's no contrast in that story. It's just a straight line. But if you hear a story where somebody rose from rags to riches, that is something that catches our interest because it has an ebb and flow. It has you go somewhere with that story. It's almost like a wave.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, for example, if I was to put two women side by side, naked, and one of them had square breasts and a square ass and a square head and square feet and square hands, and the other one was what we would normally associate to be a beautiful woman, we would see these beautiful round breasts, and we would see hips with curvature and a waist with curvature. And I don't know about you, but as a male, when I see those curvatures, it's acting on a level that's deeper than my rational mind because it makes me want to do things that you're not supposed to do in public. So it's overriding cultural conditioning. It's going to a deeper level. And so there you see the power of the curved line right in the feminine form. And men are not square either. I mean, men have their own, curvatures that women are obviously attracted to.
I love these examples. It really helps drive the point home.
Well, because it goes to something primal in us, doesn't it?
Right. And, the Coca-Cola bottle used that same psychological hack with their curved bottle to appeal to us.
Yes. And it worked.
Yeah. I'm looking at an Apple computer here, and they were very conscious in trying to make curved lines on any margin they could. And it is much more appealing than when you go to like a certain PCs that are just all straight with the sharp corners. It just doesn't feel very inviting, but it feels a bit softer and more creative.
Well, there's also the bite out of the apple, which certainly has some archetypal realities to it. It takes you right back to Adam and Eve, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And look, even your teeth are curved, no one has a square bite.
Yeah, there's a symbol I wanted to ask about what you think this means. The snake, the serpent eating itself.
Oh, that's the Ouroboros. That's the story of God. By definition, God is that for which there is no other. Therefore, the only way God can experience itself is to dream itself into existence. That's what the womb of Shakti is, and that's what Shiva is. Shiva represents the manifestation of God's dream, and Shakti is the womb in which it is created. But because there is nothing behind God, this is why in the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu said, all things have their back to the mother, which means there's nothing behind God. Therefore, for life to sustain itself, it has nothing to eat but other life. So the snake eating its own tail is telling a story. The snake represents God, the dragon, the dragon's a magical, mystical creature that both is and isn't, and God is and isn't. And so the paradox of the Ouroboros is if the snake overeats, it dies. If it undereats, it dies. And so what is the Tao? Simply stated, the Tao, practicing Taoism, means not too much, not too little, not too much food, not too little, not too much sex, not too little, not too much drugs, not too little, not too much work, not too little. That is the way of the Tao. I have a t-shirt I made that says that on it, because that's the main thing I have to teach all my patients and clients. Look, the way you live a healthy life is you walk the middle path, not too much, not too little. You don't go into these hard religious exclusions. All that does is create an appetite for everything that you're wondering why I can't have it. And if you indulge too much, it'll make you sick. So the Ouroboros is one of the most ancient symbols of the reality of God. And this is why I tell all these vegans, look, God is eating God. You know, all your stories about killing animals, well, you're killing animals all the time. You're walking on little tiny animals. Just because they're tiny doesn't mean they're not animals. You're breathing them in, your immune system's annihilating them. And I can go on and on for hours, and I have. But the point of the symbol is it's showing you that because there is nothing but God, God has nothing to sustain itself but itself. And that's why there's always got to be a balance of consumption and regeneration, giving and taking. And to the degree that you lose that balance, the first thing that happens is you get tired. The next thing that happens is you get sick. The next thing that happens is you get a disease. And the next thing that happens is you die. And then you figure out the truth of the story a little late.
Oh, I'm so glad I asked you that question. It does remind me of the yin and yang, because if the dark side overtakes the white side, if the dark fish eats the white fish, then there's nothing. It doesn't exist. They both exist for each other. And Alan Watts had a beautiful metaphor for this concept of balance. He said that there are monks that abstain from all pleasure. They avoid food that has taste. They look away from women. They don't have any sex. They do all that. They're like a wheel that is screwed on too tight and it doesn't spin. And then you have the characters that are like the professional athletes that crash their car get a DUI, that are just eating cake and overindulging or whatever. Those are the wheels that are screwed on. They're too loose and they're just wobbling out of control. And so there's this nice balance where it's like, he asked the question, do you eat to live or do you live to eat? And so the monks, they eat to live. Like everything that they're doing is to nourish their soul. And then there's the other people who live to eat, and they're always running around chasing pleasure, and they're a slave to pleasure. And so the perfect balance of that, like we are put on this earth to experience everything. And so we have taste buds. We might as well experience good food, but let's not get carried away and, live for food.
Yes. And just to sort of throw a paradox at you, I eat to live because I love and respect my body and I pay close attention to what it needs, which is why I'm going to be 63 in August and I can still lift weights and train with professional athletes and still do single arm chin-ups and shit that most guys my age don't even do anything but fantasize about anymore. So I eat to live because I have to have a relationship with my body and love it and respect it, because it's the one temple that I worship in 24/7. But I also live to eat. And why that is because whenever I bring food into my body, I pray to it and I say, thank you for joining me in body, mind, and spirit, so that together we can make the world a better place for all living beings now and in the future. Om, peace, amen. And how I see that from a spiritual perspective is I'm bringing the spirit of that animal into me. So when I eat a chicken, for example, the spirit of the chicken adds to my life force energy and gives me the ability to sustain myself. But that spirit has now become one with me as a human being. And since spirit cannot die, energy produced can only be transformed. That's the second law of thermodynamics. And the soul is energy at one end and matter at the other end. And so consciousness and body. So the spirit of the chicken in this analogy comes into my body. I invite it in to join me in body, mind, and spirit, so that together we can make the world a better place for all living beings. So for me, it's a great joy and a blessing to be able to eat consciously and know that I'm not killing something, but I'm inviting it to join me in the creative effort to make life better for all living beings, so that we respect the animals, we respect the insects, the microorganisms, we respect the great chain of being, as the Buddhists would say. And so I think for me, it's important to live to eat because it's a spiritual practice and it's a practice of reverence. But it's important to eat to live because if you're not conscious, even if you're eating meagerly, you can make yourself very sick because you're not paying attention to the nuances of what your body and its unique needs are. So I think if you're hubristic about living to eat, then the Ouroboros dies because it eats itself alive and it's dead. But if you're too monk-like, but you're not conscious of what your body needs, because unfortunately a lot of religions reject the body, and there's thousands of years of monks torturing the body, especially in Christianity and in other Abrahamic religions, the body is sinful and dirty. So you can go off the deep end over there too. And so I think as a modern practitioner of shamanism, finding the middle between living to eat and eating to live brings me into a sense of harmony with nature. Because when I die, it's important for me to be able to meet the oversoul of all these beings and feel safe that I haven't been abusive to them and that I've done everything that I could do to give them a chance to contribute through me to create education or art or conversation with you. Like right now, our breakfast is involved in this conversation, and so is yesterday's meal. And so I could be sitting here saying a bunch of stupid shit to you, and I'd probably have a lot more likes on social media, but I'm sharing the conversation with the sources of nature that give me the chance to be alive so that I can do my part for the whole. And so for me, I'm just sharing with you that I think both of them have some truth if we look at it from a spiritual perspective.
I love that. And I really appreciate how you really embody a good balance. Like when I just look at you and how fit you are, that makes me respect you a lot more as a teacher. Because like when I see a teacher that's very unhealthy, I have to question, like, do they respect themselves? Because you don't have self-discipline if if you're way overweight or if you're pretty unhealthy. I'm always going to have to take your word. I take every word with a grain of salt, but especially if somebody's very unhealthy, it's hard for me to respect their words as much.
Well, I tell all my students, if you can't teach in your underwear, then you're still a student and you're not ready to be a teacher yet. I say the first thing you should do when you go to a doctor is ask them to get undressed, or a therapist, and show you the results of their program. You don't want to learn health from sick people, and you don't want to learn how to drive from bad drivers, and you don't want to learn how to build from shitty builders. And so, I've always told people the only objective proof I have of my philosophy is my own life. And here I am. If you want me to get naked for you, I'm happy to do it. And if you want to go in the gym with me, I'm happy to do it. If you want to go lift some huge stones, I'll do it with you. Because anything else is just a bunch of academic bullshit. I love the statement, never judge a man or a woman by the creed he or she professes, but by the life he or she leads. I don't think there's any better proof of that, right? And I think that's one of the reasons we're in so much trouble, is because we have put leaders in positions of leadership that do not live the truth of what they profess. And we have university professors all over the world who don't do what they tell everybody else to do. One of the things that I did to make a point for my students is I said, you go pick up 20 health books, and then you go search that author's name on the internet and find current pictures of them and compare them to the pictures that they put on their book last year. And you'll find most of them are using doctored pictures or pictures of themselves 20 years younger for the book they're publishing today to create the illusion that they look good. But when you find the pictures of them, they're actually 40 pounds overweight, bags under their eyes, and they look like shit. Yet here they are writing books to tell you what's the absolute truth of diet and healthy living. And I'm like, that's to me, that's just a con job.
Yeah, totally agree.
Well, Mark, this is the point at which I will break it so that the free podcast ends now. And those of you that are enjoying this conversation, we're only on point of discussion number 3 of a much juicier list, and I don't want you to miss out. So if you want to join the Spirit Gym podcast membership, go to paulchek.com and you can join right there. And for a measly little $7.99 a month, you can help me feed my animals and do the work to make beautiful podcasts and find amazing people like Mark Wooding to help inspire you to live and love fully. So thank you for joining us so far, and I'll see you guys at the Spirit Gym podcast membership, where me and Mark are going to continue to have one hell of a good time with you. Lots of love. And thank you to my sponsors for all your love and support. You're amazing people doing amazing things for our amazing world. Thanks to each of you for anything you buy from the sponsors. It supports the podcast, it supports the earth, and it supports you. Aho, great spirit. Mark, thanks for part 1, buddy.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation between Paul and Mark Wooding. If you found value in today's show, there's more great content waiting for you in our special, brand new Spirit Gym podcast membership. When you subscribe, you'll get access to exclusive extended episodes of Spirit Gym with Paul Chek, members-only Q&A opportunities with Paul, access to the podcast members forum within the Spirit Gym community where you can interact with other passionate listeners, and the opportunity to purchase exclusive Spirit Gym merchandise. Your support helps keep the show running and allows us to bring you even better content. So if you're ready to dive deeper and unlock all these amazing extras, head over to paulchek.com/podcast and become a Spirit Gym podcast member today. You can watch Mark's work on his YouTube channel at After School, that's at After SKOOL, as well as at Before School, which is the secondary channel to After School and provides educational discussions with inspiring thinkers. You can support Mark via his Patreon site at patreon.com/afterschool and check out the After School Kids book, Why Don't Country Flags Use the Color Purple, on Amazon.com. For more of the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit the show notes page at paulchek.com/podcast. You can also find details of the special offers from our premier sponsors, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, Wild Pastures, and Organifi, as well as the links to Paul's social media, his YouTube channels, and his blog. And finally, if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Audible, and YouTube.